so am I. Welcome to the Strategy and Policy Committee meeting, which is about 10:05. Are there any apologies? All councillor members that are on the committee are here, plus welcome to those who are sitting in. Declarations of interest. I haven't been informed of any. I want to declare some. Item 4, public forum, petitions and deputations. Again, haven't been informed of any. Are there someone feeding back?
It always does that, it changes.
Right, okay. So we come to the confirmation of minutes. Would someone like to move that the minutes be recorded as a true and accurate record of the previous meeting? Alan and Lloyd.
Mr. Chairman, I was present. I did check in my diary.
Yes.
I don't appear as.
So you were here, but not recorded?
I was here.
Well, we'll amend that, thank you. Right. Are there any other erratum or inaccuracies which members wish to identify? If not, I'll put the motion that the minutes be confirmed. Those in favour would say aye. Aye. Against no, that's agreed. Notification of extraordinary and urgent business. We've got a couple of supplementary reports which are included. Members will acknowledge that. Item 7, questions. Do you have any questions? We'll go to Chairman and Councillors' reports. Chairman doesn't have a report this month. Any other councillors wish to report? Making excellent progress. All right, let's go to the Acting Chief Executive report. One.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first item on this agenda would not normally come to the Strategy and Policy Committee meeting, but has done so because of timing. Councillors will remember that they did have a workshop on this matter, which we now need to bring to a committee for a decision, and so I can hand over to Ali, who I think is going to speak to this item.
Right. Thank you.
Are you waiting for?
We're just going to see if we can get Polly in, because she should be joining us from online.
Oh, online.
Just in case there's any questions that I can't answer, because it's
Sure.
Polly's project. Okay, well, maybe we'll just go ahead and I'll try and answer any questions. So through you, Mr. Chair, this is the recommendations that we came to you in the workshop with a couple of weeks ago on the Environmental Enhancement Fund. So I'm going to take the item as read and just request that I'm here to answer any questions on the recommendations and help with any discussion around those recommendations that you've mentioned.
Questions? Yes, Lloyd?
Mr. Chairman, even in the workshop, I wasn't aware if there was a top ceiling for the amount that you could grant to an individual organisation. Have you had any thoughts around what that would be or what it would look like in real life?
There is no top ceiling that we've put on, so we can be flexible. Under the staff delegations, the maximum I can go to is up to 30,000. I think if we're giving 30,000 to one project, there's going to have to be a really good reason for it, because we want to get to as many projects as possible. Anything beyond that would have to go to Paul Holtz for sign off, but no, we haven't actually put a top limit on it.
So I just wonder whether, I know we're going to have some feedback through different committees, but it's very easy for it to get lost in the drive that we're actually aiming for here, which is a simpler twice a year project to come through. And I think I'm just a little bit worried that we're not going to have the oversight to this, to actually what's going on and some of the amounts that are going out. So, because when we go around the community often know about stuff, but we don't, and it's quite nice to actually know where these projects are and how they're going and updating ourselves. Like the one at Woodlands there is a project that we quite like to go back half a dozen years later and see how it's going, how the school's going on with it, and it sort of gets lost a little bit because other things take over. So I'm just wondering whether we've, just that oversight question really, one sort of extreme, and just keeping ourselves up to date, because I'm not sure how the Audit and Risk Committee, how we're going to report back to that. I know we're reporting to it, but I'm not sure how we're going to report back. So that was just my thinking when I read the report.
All right. Do you have a response to that, or we just note that comment?
Yeah, happy to report as often and as frequently as you like. So we've suggested OPAC, but if you'd like us to do a different format as well, then I'm more than happy to provide more regular updates.
Nickel?
Yes, I see that the construction of wetlands isn't going to be eligible, and I think it's something that probably was in the past. I'm just sort of wanting to know the logic of that and sort of know that they are a very valuable resource.
Yeah, so absolutely, and we fully support the creation of wetlands. It's just that for this money and what this money is for, it is for the protection of existing biodiversity and the best of what's left. So this money would be a lot of it will hopefully be used for restoring and protecting existing wetlands rather than the creation of new ones. And what we're worried about is if we start putting money into the creation of new ones, we're not going to have enough money left over for those existing ones. So it's not to say that that's not important, it's just not what this money is for.
Thanks for that. So restoring and protecting is still there. That was so.
Absolutely, and wetlands are one of our massive priorities, so that will.
David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a bit of clarification really, under options, number 10, 1, 2, 3, and under that it's like that there was support for option 3. I'm not quite sure. Is that number 3 of those 3?
Yes, so at the workshop, there was a bit of discussion about that, and Councillor Ludlow, I think, was the one that suggested that that was the better option, that we ran it through having Te Ao Marama involved in the decision making, but all Maori land was treated in the same way, but with the Te Ao Marama lands over the top.
No, just wondered about options numbers 1 and 2. Prioritise support projects above other applications. Just that's probably, to me, a wee bit concerning.
Yeah, so I think the recommendation is to go with the third one.
Thank you for that. Alan?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So just on page 12, it talked about proposed changes. These targets are ambitious, and the biodiversity team has been expanded from 1 to 4 time staff members to deal with increased workload. So is this purely in relation to this project, or is so we're getting $300,000 from the government over for 4 years?
So we are getting 4.2 million over 4 years, and so that pays for the staff time, it pays for the ecological surveys. So this 300,000 for each of these years is just part of that wider project, so it's not the own. It's
Right,
not
I was kind of hoping that was be for us to get 4 staff members. Cost us probably more than $300,000 that we're getting from the government. It seemed a little bit an employment scheme rather than a nature scheme.
Yeah, so absolutely. So the staff are already in place, so this is just allowing them to start dishing out the grants, which will be up to about 300,000.
Lloyd?
Yeah, I know, I was just supporting option 3 there, rather than prioritising the ones, and if it was a specific fund, it goes straight to Ngāi Tahu for dishing out without oversight. So I would support number 3 where all applications are treated equally, but certainly encourage as much as many Runanga projects as possible.
I was just wondering, how are we handling the comms on this? And I note under implications and risk to talk about a potential perception of a reduction. And when we just put rates up significantly amongst our troops out in the community, we don't actually want any wrong perceptions, I wouldn't have thought. And we also had some discussion this morning about where wetlands fits into the program. So my question is, how do we deal with the comms and making sure that we don't have perceptions running out in amongst the troops?
So of our new staff, 2 of them are 100% for getting out into the community and talking with landowners. So they will be doing comms on a daily basis with everybody. And I believe the comms team are also employing, or in the process of employing somebody to work with my team full-time on all of these different projects and all of the different comms and all of the complicated messaging that's coming out at the moment. So we're going to have somebody dedicated to helping us getting that right.
Which is also funded through this project.
Which is also funded.
Okay. Right, yeah, Bonnie,
Lyndall's got a question.
sorry?
Lyndall's got a
Oh,
question.
Lyndall, sorry, Lyndall, go for it.
Thanks, Eric. Atamaria, everybody. In response to Councillor McCallum's question about reports, I think the regular report to the OPAC committee should be sufficient as far as risk and spend and reporting. But I wonder if we might find another way to have the odd, well, not a muffin talk, but some of those presentations to council might actually be about some of those projects, so that we have got an idea of what some of the community are doing. But anyway, my question is actually, what other periods of application that you mentioned in the report, Ali? You said there's going to be two periods open for application. What timing of the year are they going to be?
So this year, because we're already in spring, we want to get the applications out as soon as we possibly can, based on council decision to go ahead with this. So it will be now for the next, or after it's been approved, for the next 4 to 6 weeks. And then what we'll open it again at the end of the year, so in autumn, so that we can be working with applicants over the winter so that they are ready to go and start doing the work in September. So that's what we'll be looking at, trying to get ready for next financial year, this financial year, so that we've got as much time as possible for applicants to do the work.
Fabulous, thank you.
Everybody happy? Is someone prepared to move the resolutions? Bonnie? So we'll move them in block if the council is happy with that. So we're taking resolutions 1 to 4 and moved by Bonnie, seconded. Lloyd? Medium Lloyd. He was first. I'll put the question. Those in favour would say aye. Against, no. That's agreed. We move to item 2.
Thank you. So, Mr Chair, we've brought an update and a paper for noting to you in relation to the process for updating the visions for freshwater management in the regional policy statement. We've discussed this a few times, but Vicky and Nick are here to answer some questions about that in relation to the process. Should you have any questions arising from this paper, there's no recommendation for approval, just simply to note the process at some point.
Okay, we'll take it as read. Questions, comments? Nicole?
I guess with these changes, I'm not sure whether we've updated our website with the changes that have come. We've had an issue recently where a contractor had checked the rules and it was about dams and things like that. It appears that the changes to the MPS have made it more complicated, and he made the point was, look, try to do the right thing. If there's changes, could you communicate with contractors, because they're normal ones that are doing the things. But I'm also thought, since if we've got stuff on our website that's outdated with this higher order document coming in, we need to have it clear so that people who are trying to do the right things are doing the right things. So it's a bit of an aside, but it has I've come across this in the last week or two, and I wasn't aware that there was changes to that specific regulation. So it's actually good communication with the public, I think, is really good. We have to give effect to these things, but if the changes are there, we need to update our communication.
It would be my observation that we've got a fairly confused landscape out there with the wider public a little bit confused between what is Three Waters, what is the NPS, where is the water and land plan that we did some work on, and even media talking to me are quite unsure of what fits where in the program. I don't know how we actually resolve that, but it certainly is potential for quite a bit of discontent out in the community as they try to sort of sort a way through all the different issues that
Sure.
running out there. I just note that, I'm not saying fix it today, but there certainly is some confusion out there as to where pieces are segmented off.
So, Mr. Chair, in relation to any matter that's reflects the NES or the NPSFM, if there's anything that's changed in our own rules, we'll have a chat to policy and make sure that policy and comms have updated that. In relation to the regional policy statement, though, this is a piece of work that's longer term, so there's no immediate change to information on our website as a result of this. It's more to update you on the process and where we're at with it. I think that Lucy will have updated us about this at a previous workshop, I think, and possibly also at this committee, just in relation to our requirement to do this. And we've chosen not to review the entire regional policy statement, but to do what's necessary in relation to freshwater, and that was your direction to us at previous meetings. And so that's underway. And we're working very closely with Te Ao Marama to make sure that the visions align with the work that we've already had underway in relation to the people, water and land process. So this is really just for your information as to where we're at in that process and what the steps are, if that requires some further conversation and clarification.
Lloyd?
Picking up a little bit in the last two comments, I think the community doesn't quite understand the hierarchy of documents and what's happening, and I think what would help this process a little bit is that this is a south and wide document, and the other TAs need to be aware that their rules and planning actually fit under this as well. So I think
They're subservient to this.
Yeah, so we need to probably put some clarity about where some of these things are fitting. So a bit of a roadmap may help as we move forward, just to try and get some clarity, because the more familiar you are, you go to what you know, but there's a global view here that we need to.
Sure.
The government's putting through on a timetable, they need to understand this is why we're going back to do this, because of redirection and updating documents.
Agreed.
Peter?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just interesting to pick up on that word visions around freshwater. The regional policy statement, is there any scope to widen that out to what I would call a landscape vision for the province and start discussing that within that document, because people that I'm talking to see that there's real need right at this point. We're talking carbon forestry, of course, to actually start talking about how we want our province to be and look like well into the future. And some people are saying to me, if we don't have that discussion now around the landscape vision, we'll get what we deserve. So just putting that out there, but if there is any capacity in that document to have a discussion about that and broaden that out to other regional authorities too.
Thank you. Lyndall? Well, take Alan and then go to Lyndall.
Yeah, I was going to bring that sort of very point up and under the further discussion in the kind of climate change, because I too support that there are concerns going forward as to what our region might look like 60, 80 years forward if we haven't had some discussion on shaping it. And so I support what Peter's saying, that we do need to look at that further. Just clarifying this initially, we're seeing comments say on page 19, Tammy staff have previously been involved in developing the visions for Otago Regional Council's regional policy statement. So are they ahead of us in the review of what they're required to do for a change?
So yes, they are in terms of the RPS. In relation to having the regional policy statement aligned with the national planning framework, so that we can, when we actually submit the changes to the proposed water and land plan, that all of our documents align.
So what stage so the community shaping the visions, obviously the staff are going to have some thought on what the visions are. Tomorrow is going to have some thought on what the visions are. And is it going to be a little bit like the values and objectives where they come together, or how do the wider community get a chance to input at an earlier stage rather than at a later stage where it seems to be more fait accompli?
So there's probably two answers to that, and I'll actually ask you to talk a bit about this in a minute. But a lot of the work that will inform this has already happened. Quite a bit of what this is very procedural in order to make sure that we actually have our planning instruments aligned. But if you want to talk a little bit, Vicky, about your timeline and where the input into this process will actually include the public, if it does.
So, like Wilma has said, we do have a lot of information that we've already have available through the work that was done with the Share Your Why and the visions and objectives work that's been done. So there is a significant amount of sort of community knowledge and data that we already hold that we're able to use for this process. So what we have been doing, so the PMP team and Tammy, we've been working together quite closely over these last few weeks in with drafting the visions. It is an ongoing, quite iterative process. We propose something, it goes to the Te Ao Marama staff, they share it with their whānau, we get feedback and you know, we work on it again. And we are scheduling for pre-notification consultation in around January, and then public notification of it and towards the end of May at this stage, which is, and those are the sorts of parts of the process where the community can get involved. Obviously, there'll be some comms work going around it for the January pre-notification stage as well. So that's when people get a chance to get involved.
And so do we see it as a workshop and later in this month, or what's?
Yes, so there is a workshop. We're hoping to have the draft visions at a workshop later this month, and then for approval for the visions to go out for notification in January, or pre-notification, sorry. Yeah.
So because we've already been working for a few years in this space now with the community, as Vicky says, around the development of visions of Freshwater, we're well ahead of this. This is about bringing it together into a very specific planning framework that we have to meet in order to actually put the plan change forward at the end of 2023.
We'll go to Lyndall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This kind of follows on from Alan's point in a way. Firstly, wanted to thank the staff for making the report clear and understandable. And just wanted to say that the link to the fact sheet has actually got a really good explanation of that big question about what is Te Mana or Te Wai. I know Councillor McPhail has often said, you know, farmers out there, as soon as you say that, those words, they don't even know what you're talking about and their ears close off. So I wonder, you know, I would recommend that we kind of share that fact sheet or parts of it as part of that conversation Councillor Baird is maybe suggesting as well, so that there's a better understanding of the whole concept and how it all fits together.
Comment there? Yes.
I'd just like to make a comment on Lyndall's statement there. Part of this process for the visions is we need to set a Te Mana o Te Wai objective for the whole region. So we need to be able to convey how we as a region are going to implement Te Mana o Te Wai. So that is part of this process as well. So, so that I think will go some way into helping people understand what it is we're actually trying to achieve. So the Te Mana o Te Wai objective will sit there within the RPS as well.
Just need to make sure that people know what that phrase means.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I guess what the changes to our regional policy statement are not a full review. This has been driven by the government's one plan concept where the cascade is much clearer, including the district plans. And Otago, Judge Skelton's suggestion, I think, has been the first cab off the rank. So it's not a full review. It's but obviously you've got the cascade that starts from the RMA. You've got the MPSs, NESs, coastal plan, regional plans, district plans. So I'm assuming that we will be going out to consult on the changes, not the whole plan. Am I correct in that?
Correct.
Okay, Robert.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just building on a little bit on what Lyndall and you were saying, just a moment ago about Te Manu Te Wai and making sure that we are au fait, up to date with where iwi's thinking is now, because their thinking will be developing alongside of our own. And I see that you will be doing work with them, but I just wonder if we must make sure that the council itself doesn't get disconnected from iwi by having these things filtered through and then arriving as a package. So I'm just wondering, are we going to get other opportunities for direct conversation with iwi representatives about where we are right now? And I hope that we are, because we can get disconnected and start being very theoretical about this, and we can get offline with each other without knowing it. So I don't know, is that a possibility? I mean, I think it's a necessity, but is it a possibility?
So there is the November workshop where we will have some draft visions in the Te Manu Te Wai objective for you to consider and discuss. At this stage, there isn't anything else scheduled, but if that was something that was necessary, then...
I just wonder if that particular focus could be actually provided for, rather than we can vaguely think it might happen. Could that point be made that we'd like to hear directly? Because I'd need to prepare for that, perhaps.
Potentially, I mean, maybe there could potentially be an opportunity for some sort of presentation in that workshop that could open that conversation pathway.
Well, I don't know if I can, but I'd like to suggest that we do actually action that rather than vaguely waiting and hoping that it might occur. Is that possible, Mr. Chairman?
Unsure. What do you say,
So
Warren?
just considering what you're saying there, I think we already have a joint workshop that we run through People Water and Land, which is closely aligned to this work stream.
Yeah.
And so we meet with the TAMI board. There's no reason why we can't have a workshop with the TAMI board on this. Their staff are working actively with us and come here. Maria works with Vicky and Nick on this process. And so at an officer level that's very close, they of course report back to their board. So there's no reason why we could not incorporate a council TAMI board conversation at some point in this process.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean, and I've no doubt that there's lots of interaction going on, but I'm just wondering if that specific opportunity might be presented and asked for. Here's a chance for you guys to tell us, just once again,
Yep.
or I really enjoy that personally.
So we will look at the joint workshop schedule with Te Marama board. And there's no reason why we wouldn't be able to incorporate a conversation at the end of that meeting on this topic. Yeah.
Good point. Well noted. Lloyd?
Just clarification, is that council only or council with TAMI? Because I actually have a view that council only need to discuss this as well as a discussion with TAMI.
I'm suggesting an additional matter to the workshop that's planned in November.
Yeah, because I'd like to have a better understanding, and I was going to raise, Mr. Chairman, that all the stuff looks fine until you actually get right down to what does it actually mean on the ground, and understanding what it looks like on the ground, then we often find that yes, it's in harmony, or sometimes it's in conflict. We just need to understand what it looks like when you actually put it right down into that, consent, compliance, action on the ground, permitted activity stuff. That's when it really sort of comes to light, and that's the first time people really see it. Up until then, it's like a conversation that, like many conversations that you hear but don't quite fully understand.
Sure.
All right. Rachel?
Mr. Chair, I was just going to note that the next People Water and Land workshop is coming up on the 24th of November, and it is certainly my understanding that this will be on the agenda for that.
Thank you for that. Right, Nicole?
Yes, just on that, we've had a conversation in recent weeks about the possibility with Naitahu, which have been on the tribe for most of South Island, that actually, a little bit like an NBS, if there was a view on this that Naitahu came up with, there would still be the ability for the local Ranungas to put some flavour on it, but I guess because we really don't want great inconsistencies just over the border because it only confuses people. But it might be way forward. This is a new concept that a lot of people are going to have difficulty getting their head around. Some consistency and just understanding how it all works will be really good in the mountains of the sea, and you've got the well-being of the water body, which it is going to take some time for people to get their head around it. But if we get a reasonably consistent approach, so it's not different than just over the border in Otago, would be quite useful going forward, and I think we need that collaboration too.
And so,
Well, Jeremy, I kind of sense we're getting through this, but I'll take Jeremy.
Chair, just in regards, just to sort of reaffirm, I'm just sitting here thinking as I'm sitting on the boundary of Southern and Otago with a road between us. It'd be nice to know that the visions and everything are the same between the provinces, because we're exactly the same, like the iwi vision should be all similar wherever you are. And that's where I was saying, should we actually be engaging, actually sit down with Otago sometime and just sit around the table and have a bit of a yarn, because we should be pretty near the same in a lot of this sort of stuff, especially with iwi too. So it's really more of a collaborative approach.
I think Vicky can answer this question in terms of who's working on this project, so.
So there is certainly an opportunity to sit down and have conversations with Otago on this. We are really fortunate that we've got Maria Bartlett helping as the Tema representative, and she had a significant involvement with ORC's development as well. So she has she certainly has a lot of knowledge of ORC's process and content. But part of that pre-notification in January will be discussions with ORC, and obviously any feedback that we get from there, we take that feedback on board, and then we come back to you with our final draft visions for after we've had that consultation process.
There's been some valuable points raised here, which I think we'll ruminate on, for want of a better term. I think this is a report for noting. I'm not sure there's any other need to extend the conversation at this point. So is someone ready to move recommendations 1 to 3? Alan, and seconded David. I'll put the question, those in favour would say aye, against no. That's agreed. We move to item 3, climate change update.
Thank you for your time.
Talk to us, Rachel.
Morning everyone. This is just a short update following on from the council workshop at the end of September where we touched on the climate change space, and actually we have a series of workshops coming up. The next one will be next week, and we'll be focused on picking up that conversation, but also the new consultation document that's out on the emission reductions plan. So on that, I'd quite like to introduce my 2 new staff members. I've got Janelle Reese and Val Bandera. In fact, do you guys want to come up to the table? So Janelle's picked up the role of principal advisor, working with the executive in providing strategic advice, and has got some background in the climate change space, so has been looking at the consultation document and liaising with staff from across the organisation on that. Val is a new insight and partnership advisor, more recently with SIT in the region, whereas Janelle's come from Australia earlier in the year and done some contract work for MPI in the fisheries sector recently. But we'd just like to introduce them both to you, and you'll see more of them at the workshop next week.
And the date for that workshop again?
It's the 11th, and the other thing to note that there is a joint council workshop, or councillors from all councils getting together on the 22nd of November, as you will have seen in your diaries, and during that session we'll be talking climate change.
Peter?
Yeah, thanks very much for that. I just picked up on a few things, a few lines. The possibility of a joint submission with other councils being explored. We're planning to jointly develop and implement the regional strategy. So my question is, where does a layer of governance fit in about that, or are we just trying to determine where that fits at the moment? it seems though all this stuff's happening, it's moving along underneath, and we're just sort of getting told of it. So I don't know. That is a question, I think.
Through you, Mr. Chair, so just to respond to that, perhaps the wording could have been a little bit more explicit. So really what's happening at this stage, we've got that initial direction from you at the end of September. With the submission, we are clearly going to be working that through with you next week and the following week with the other councils, and that was a chance for you to then decide whether you wish to do a joint submission or not. So you may choose not to do a joint submission, so we'll be seeking direction from council on that. In terms of the joint strategy, which comes from the levels of service and performance measures and targets and the long-term plan, basically where we're at this stage is there has been the discussion at the start of the year that yes, the councils would like to go down this track of working on proposals to bring to you about how we advance that, including both governance and staff structures and how that would all work. So, yes, certainly intended that councillors direct where that goes.
Okay, Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm building on Peter's question in that the Climate Change Action Committee that we once had, I presume it's been dissolved. We've moved on from that, this is correct, but that kind of leaves us councillors with nothing to get together around except to wait for your report. So I think, I don't know if that's what you were meaning, Peter, but that is the feeling I also get. We're sitting and waiting. But I do have a second question, and that's around COP26 and the discussions that are going on at the moment. How closely are you following those, and what are your expectations in terms of dramatic pronouncements as a result of that conference affecting what it is we're doing here, or our plans even?
So again, for you, Mr. Chair, perhaps to respond to the first query about the committee that has existed previously, so that certainly needs to be part of the options we put to you in terms of going forward. We've had an existing structure. These are some options going forward, including what we've done previously, so that will come through to you. In terms of the second question about what's happening over in Glasgow, we are keeping a watching brief, and that was something we intended to discuss at the workshop next week.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Lloyd?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I presume there's two layers here, Rachel. One is a region-wide view, and we supported that at the last workshop so that we had a connected across Southland approach. But there's also, picking up Robert's point, there's what are we doing within that overall framework? It's not quite clear in here that we'll have our part to play within that wider strategy. So the wider strategy is important for all councils to actually think about that approach, and then the other information that's coming to us is will filter down through the process, but we need to think about where we are now and what are we actually doing about what we know. The other stuff will come, like everything else, will add to it over time. Is that the correct understanding?
So what we are looking at doing in it, you'll see this in item 5, is reporting on both the regional approach, the strategy, and our own internal work linked to the action plan going forward. So we're certainly conscious of the need to be seeking direction and reporting back to council at both levels. So certainly something we are aware of and looking at how we advance that best.
Sure. A bigger, wider question is, at some stage, every business will actually have some data on this, where they are. Are we thinking, and maybe it's a workshop topic, are we thinking far enough ahead that we may need to be the holder of some of that information and track that information over time? Because individual properties will have a footprint, and we're saying we want the footprint to move in a certain direction. Are we going to be in that framework to actually do that?
It might be something that we bring through to the workshop next week.
So I've got Alan, then Lyndall, then Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So just really about the topic I talked briefly about in the last item under the permanent carbon farming. I asked two questions. I circulated a report that had come from the Gisborne region, and where they were more than concerned about how their region could look in the future with high levels of class 6 to 8 land, and the fact that that land has been sort of almost thumb-marked for forestry without a lot of oversight or at least a consented process. How far advanced are we with the knowledge of our area, class 6 to 8 land, and also planted forestry that's post 89 that might not need to be harvested, could also turn into permanent forestry? So it's just really the landscape. What could our region look like going forward with really the high value of carbon credits and the likelihood that further farms, particularly hill country farms, could easily be sold into permanent carbon farming?
So, in response to your question there, Councillor Beard, the short answer is that there are a number of parties doing work in this space at the moment. So I think during your briefing from Great South, they touched on this as being an area that they were looking at, and Southland District have got some thinking underway, as I understand, and likewise I'm pretty sure Beef and Lamb are looking at this across the country. So I think the best thing for us to do is to come back to you with a more detailed response at the workshop again next week.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Lyndall?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to reiterate some of what I'd heard, actually. I completely appreciate that we need the governance structure and the processes and the paperwork, but I don't want to be considered to be one of those leaders who sits inside and talks stuff and makes bits of paper about it and doesn't actually do anything. So I guess my comment is that I look forward to the workshop, because to reinforce Peter and Robert's comments about actually getting some stuff done and engaging the young people so that they're activated in this space would be a priority for me.
Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Ellen sort of covered off on what I was going to talk about, so that's fine.
Right, if there's no, Nickel?
Yes, just a couple of points. It does talk about a possible joint council submission, and I'm sort of conscious that over the last year or two, we actually did contract NEWA to give us information on potential climate change, and that was done in conjunction with the TAs. So I think there's a really good synergy there to actually have a joint committee. On the land use thing, I think it would be good for us to join up with the local TAs who actually have land use. I know there are a number of councils who have contracted Malcolm, Alexandra, etc., to get some advice on this matter. But rather than waiting for national direction, there probably is the ability to have some sort of land use conversation going on, so that people just can't. At the moment, you can buy the whole farm and plant it basically, and there's real concerns. We know trees in the right place are good, but at the moment there is a real concern around the countryside on.
So can I just ask how you think the way forward would be on that issue?
Well, I think it would be good for staff to perhaps start a conversation or arrange a meeting where we could be involved, because at the moment we're sort of sitting on the sidelines, but we also have concerns about the same thing happening to communities, water shortages in some areas, and just it's too important, I think, to leave this thing is gaining momentum, and as the carbon price goes up, it'll become a stampede if there's not some regulation around what you can do and can't. The book of Kawi soil is probably a good example, and that maybe the vehicle is actually having controls over highly productive land.
I have another overlay on that as well, which is fit for purpose plantations, and it's a concern to me that we might be replicating what happened with Wilding Pines, particularly with Douglas firs being anticipated to be planted in some areas of the province, and there needs to be some scrutiny put on to fit for purpose plantations as well, or some requirements to handle wilding trees if that's not the case. And I think that's just another overlay that needs to go in that whole debate of carbon farming. Peter?
Mr. Chairman, you asked a really good question, how do we do it? And I take it back to what I said, a shared vision, a landscape vision for this province amongst all our partners, because we can be firing off shots, all the councils talking about what we don't like and what could happen. But it will happen if we don't do anything about it. So once we have a broad agreement of what we want our place to be like and to look like in the future, then we can move forward. If we have to advocate the central government around protections on classes of land, and maybe go so far as to talk about protections on high value pastoral lands, as opposed to high value productive land. So that's a whole new step together. So we do it together and we move forward together.
The comments are noted. I think this is a report for noting only, but some valuable insights have come out of it. Would someone like to move the recommendation on page 21? Bonnie, and seconded Nicole. I'll put the question, those in favour will say aye. Against no, that's agreed. We move to item 4. Larwood World Rivers Day National Picture in the hands of Elaine.
So, Mr. Chair, just to introduce the science team, as we have started again, the in line with terms of references of this committee is to ensure that our science work as it is presented to you also is available through our official committee structure and to the public. You'll have noticed that we did actually release this information at the time that it came out, around the 27th of last month, I think, from memory. And this is a slightly more fulsome report to you on the lava data. Just also want to note that this is going to be Dr. Moriarty's last strategy and policy meeting with us, because she has decided to return to her New Zealand hometown of Christchurch. And a fact about which we have to be happy for her.
I will still see all of you through your accounts.
Yes, and so she's going to work in private catering.
Okay, bearing in mind this is another report for noting, and we've got another 2 items on the agenda after this, and a council meeting scheduled in 7 minutes. Not want to curtail discussion, but can we just be mindful of our responsibilities? Lloyd?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I used to found this report hard to read, and I say that because I didn't know where I was. I was jumping around between 5 years, 15 years, 20 years, and looking at the time frames, and I didn't get the sense that work had been done and we were seeing, or we were looking at, my sense is there's a number of sites that now are, we're not sure where they're going, but they have changed from a trend to a neutral stance, if I say that right. So I found it quite difficult because we saw this with the hearing that we did, that depending on what group of years you use, you will get different outcomes. And I'm really interested from the community's point of view to be in that smaller end, because we've argued that we've had this very short-term view that action in Southland will be seen relatively quickly, not like in other areas of New Zealand. So I found it quite difficult, Mr. Chairman, to actually get a full sense of encouraging the community to do more, that what they're doing is actually helping the situation. And in this report, we seem to jump around between the number of years that may be confusing. And then also it talks about developing an action plan. And I didn't know what that would look like. How would that actually land? Where does that fit within the other hierarchy? So I did have some difficulty trying to make some sense of this report. And I apologise for that, but that's, as I go through it, I'm going, well, I'm just not too sure where this is landing for me, really. And I don't know if it was actually as helpful as I think your intent was. So that was my comment, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, okay. So it's
You, Mr. Chair.
Happy to take any questions on the report. I think, Councillor McCullum, some of the, take on board your comments and thank you very much. I think some of the reasoning for that would be the different amount of time that we would have data for different sites, that you use different time periods, but we could certainly look at having a standardised set of, giving you one view that is just the 5 years, if that would be helpful.
Because I think, if I may, Mr. Chairman, it talks about, I think by memory, 13 sites and 12 sites in D, but I didn't know where they were. I didn't understand what that actually meant within the profile. So that's where obviously it was.
Would this maybe be something, for you, Mr. Chair, that a workshop would be helpful
Yeah, I was thinking
to?
that might be. There's a lot of
It is a lot of
data in one report. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
I think what's important for your noting though, councillors, is that there is a requirement for us to create action plans in relation to very specific matters that are raised as a result of this data. And so that is something that we are working through. So right now, policy and planning team are working through the implementation ramifications for the NES and the MPSFM. And so that was just so that you are aware that that is actually what the LAWA data has thrown up as an action for us. So that was the purpose of that note.
okay, so we note that this is a lot of information, but we probably need a workshop
We'll have a workshop.
engage a bit further. I have Alan then Nicol.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just on point 16, impaired ecological health is evident in almost 2/3 of monitored river sites, demonstrated by the proportion of EMCI sites classified as attribute C and D. So how many sites do we do the EMCI examination, and how often per year? It's not so straightforward, is it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have an annual freshwater ecosystem health assessment program that aims to assess invertebrates at up to 95 sites on an annual basis. On any given year, there can be some, climatic and environmental conditions that reduce our ability to get to every single one of those sites, but we aim to get to 95. Last year we completed all of them, and in most years we get over 90% of them.
So the annual visit normally about the same time every year for each site, or how do we?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, the timing of that program is consistent in that it's through sort of January, February, March. It's timed to coincide with a period of relatively low flows and sort of highest ecological stress, but also access our large rivers under safe conditions. Yeah, so they're consistently monitored through that summer period.
Nicol?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been trying to look for some positives in this, and I know our scientific team like a long period, but in the last 5 years, there looks to be improving trends in the P and Andy. And I guess the concerning one for me is the macrovert index, which I always thought was a pretty useful one as far as how the health of your ecosystem is going. And with 2/3, it doesn't look that are in the wrong place. That's quite worrying, but when I look at the national thing, we're about the same, so that's some level of comfort that we're not an aberration. But I guess on our action plans that we will be focusing, I guess, on why is that situation, will riparian planting make a big difference? I think probably will, but I look forward to a workshop and just finding what we can take.
Right, take Lloyd here.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wondering, we've got a well-established process for macroinvertebrate assessment. I'm just wondering if we use plant, like water plant species and health and fish numbers, because we've probably got 20 freshwater fish species in the south, and whether they come into any of the monitoring schemes, or maybe the fish is maybe Fish and Game do that, and someone in DOC does the
Through you, Mr. Chair, our freshwater ecosystem health assessment program includes a regular assessment of algae biomass, not species composition. So we look at algae and measure the chlorophyll A covering the bed of the river, and that's used to grade sites against national criteria. we don't have a program that assesses macrophytes or vascular plants in water. In terms of fish, there was a characterisation program that was carried out in the 2014-2017 time period, which has fed into the People, Water and Land program, an indicator of fish biological integrity, the fish IBI index. It's not a quantitative index, it's a presence absence index, very similar to the macroinvertebrate community index. And this coming summer we have plans to, in parallel with our macroinvertebrate community monitoring, use a molecular environmental DNA monitoring method to detect fish presence, absence, or presence, and I guess beyond that, Fish and Game do carry out some fish monitoring at a regional level. They focus their activities on salmonoid species in our sort of main stem rivers, and they sort of carry a drift diving exercise, and they repeat that every year, recording the number and size of trout in different size classes for sort of 1 kilometre reaches of all of our main rivers. And they also, as I understand, do a little bit of work monitoring trout spawning as well.
David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just be quick. It's really just look forward to the workshop, because I think we need to have a fairly serious conversation as to control, what we can control and what we can't control when it comes to particularly sediment and E. coli. Because the community is going to question us over that. So I think that's something that
Cool. Well, I think it's been a good discussion. There's been a request for a workshop. Will was nodded. So would someone like to move the recommendations? Thank you, Alan. Seconded Bonnie. I'll put the question. Those in favour will say aye. Against no. That's agreed. Item 5.
So item 5, councillors, is our new style of information. Can we do that? And so good. Yep, we can. We can adjourn this last item, or this item might only take 2 minutes. Okay. So this is just a new way of actually presenting to you our work program. We've included, in the past you've seen the strategy and policy work program. This is now the group's work program across the whole of the strategy group, and includes information about discussion papers that have been released and council submission timeframes. So this will be the format that we will continue. If you are happy with that, councillors?
Yeah, I think we just will move. It's for noting. So would someone like to move that? Bonnie, seconded David. Put the question. Those in favour say aye. Against no. That's agreed. I don't think there's any urgency to deal with the publicly excluded minutes, and we can do them at another time, can we? No?
Well, if it's only going to take a few seconds.
Right, okay, let's do it.
I'll move that we move into public excluded.
Move that we go to publicly excluded. Lloyd seconded. You can tell us why?
The matter is subject to proceedings in the Environment Court, and council is authorised to deliberate in private.
I put the question. Those in favour would say aye. Publicly excluded. Would someone like to move that the minutes be confirmed? Thank you, David. Seconded Lloyd.
Wait for
Right.
the offline.
We're offline. I'm going to